Today, I want to talk about Paradox Mage and how I beat insane roguelike difficulty with it. This video will have two parts. In the first one, I'll go over all the Paradox Mage talents. In the second one, I'll show you the specific character that I beat the game with. I'll talk you through the decisions I made and how I would improve some of the mistakes. Everything is timestamped, so you can easily skip to the parts that you're interested in. Before we can talk about what Paradox Mage does, you need to first have a basic understanding of Paradox, the resource the class uses for all of its spells. It represents your ability to stay in control while manipulating the time itself. The numbers on the resource bar are your modified paradox, raw paradox, and the anomaly chance. As you cast spells, your paradox will increase by their cost instead of decreasing, and the higher you go above 300, the more powerful your spells get, with extra spell power and increased duration. Unfortunately, this also means your anomaly chance starts increasing, giving you a percentage chance to fail casting a spell and to instead trigger a random anomaly. These can be a wide variety of things, from digging out space around you, to giving something a shield, or even teleporting in a bunch of innocent villagers. If you manage to get above 600 paradox, you will instead start triggering major anomalies, which are pretty simple, as they all just try to kill you. Outside of combat you can then rest and tune your paradox back to the equilibrium. There is more to it, but this should be enough to understand how things work. Let's get into the talent trees. First up is Chronomancy. Precognition is just track, but it's a spell. It lets you sense enemies through terrain, and this effect is, in my opinion, one of the best defensive talents in the entire game. Especially in the late game, you just can't afford to face check rooms, because sometimes there are 4 rares, 2 uniques, and maybe a boss just waiting around the corner, and if you aggro them all at once, you're going to have a bad time. For this reason, it's always good when you don't have to rely on getting a thief escort or an item to get track, so having precognition is great. Foresight is a passive that gives you a minor defense and crit shrug off buff, and while crit shrug off is a great stat, you're not getting a lot of it here. The supposed upside is that you get double these stats while precognition or see the threats is active, but they will rarely be on in combat, so this is nothing too exciting. Contingency though is a sustain that works similarly to the classic D&D contingency. You pick a spell, which notably includes runes, and it will instantly trigger once you get below a certain health threshold. Usually you just put your best shield here, and this is a solid defensive layer, and later on it can even be maxed because of it triggering sooner and the triggered spell getting more powerful. See the Threats lets you explore 3 different futures and then pick which one you like the most. From what I've read, this seems to be a fairly controversial skill. Some people don't think it's worth putting a point into. It mostly lets you make potentially stupid decisions without the risk of dying. You want to test out if you can kill that rogue marauder unique before it can get close and murder you? Go ahead. Maybe a boss has a really high spell save and you want to improve your chance at landing a key debuff? Perhaps you've been pulled into a room full of dangerous enemies and you need to use your movement infusion to run away, but the way back is blocked. Well, with See the Threats, you can run into different corridors and find the one without more enemies waiting for you. Although casting it does take a turn, so ideally you want to cast this before you get into combat. If you die in any of the timelines, you will get spit out at the point at which you originally cast the spell, but thankfully you can also simply cancel the spell early, so if you get badly chunked in timeline 1, you can just cancel it and still explore the other 2 timelines. I find it to be a versatile spell that's worth a point or 2. Fate Weaving is the reason why I'm talking about the generic trees first, as it will impact how you evaluate every other skill. Spin Fate is a passive that makes you gain 1 spin each time you get hit, and it stacks up to 3 spins. For each spin you then get some defense and saves. So far, pretty mediocre. Seal Fate is an active instant speed ability, and during it, when you damage a target, you gain a spin. You also get an up to 40% chance to increase the duration of 1 detrimental status effect by 1 turn. And this chance is also then increased by 33% per spin, so up to 80% at 3 spins and max rank. The debuff duration increase can occur up to 6 times per turn. Keeping your enemies debuffed is great, and you can just put points into this, auto-cast it at the beginning of each fight, and forget about it, it will do work. But if you only apply a few, or even a single debuff to an enemy, you can make them last potentially more or less infinitely, so keep this in mind. Fate Weaver is a passive that gives some spell power per spin, which is good. You can never have enough spell power, especially on classes that rely on lending their debuffs, and Paradox Mage is one of those. Webs of Fate is an instant speed active for 5 turns that displaces up to 30% of any damage you receive onto a random enemy. This is obviously incredible. You feel pretty invulnerable while this is on. Oh, and by the way, you may gain 1 additional spin per turn, and your maximum spin is doubled. Every Paradox Mage should be maxing this. The third category is Spacetime Weaving. Dimensional Step is an instant speed teleport that goes all the way up to 10 range. This is also incredible. It even only has 10 turns of cooldown. There's not much more you can ask of your escape skill. Notably, it is a spell, so if you get silenced it won't work, but on mages you need to be able to deal with silence anyways. Dimensional Shift is a passive that makes it so that when you teleport, you reduce the duration of a single debuff on you by 2 turns and up to 7 turns at the max rank. This is deceptively good, especially in the early game. You'll get annoying short stuns or confusions, and cleansing them with Dimensional Step so that you can save your inscriptions for the big debuffs is pretty helpful. It also has great synergy with Wormhole, which lets you create 2 points, and anything stepping on one will teleport to the other. If you combine this with a movement infusion, you could very quickly remove all of your debuffs just by wormholing constantly. And it gets even better. Phase Pulse is a sustain with a fairly high paradox cost that makes you stun, blind, confuse or pin enemies in a small radius when you teleport. You will debuff both around the start and the destination point. Now for Wormhole and Phase Pulse to start feeling good, they require a fairly significant point investment, and even then, they're not that impressive. But to get the full picture, there is a class category that is very much tied to this constantly teleporting theme, which I'll talk about shortly. For the locked categories you have Survival, which is a good tree, but you only get 1.0 mastery for it, and you don't need track, so I doubt you'll ever be taking it. The other one is Energy, which is very much worth considering. Energy Decomposition is a sustain that reduces all incoming damage by 30%, but only up to a flat value based on your spell power. This means it gradually stops being as effective against bigger hits, but it's still great and worth your points. It goes up to around 50 in the endgame. Energy Absorption is a weird one. You sap a target's energy, placing some of their talents on cooldown, which is fairly useless because enemies eventually have too many talents for this to matter. But, more importantly, you also reduce the cooldown of some of your talents by up to 4 turns. For this spell to be useful, it requires some investment and planning. Just kind of randomly using it on enemies unsurprisingly doesn't feel very impactful. It's important to note, this works on any talents, so even things like Prodigies or Inscriptions, which is good, but it also means that it's not that simple to target something specific. I personally never found much use for this. Redux is somewhat similar. It lets you cast the next talent with a cooldown of up to 10 turns or less without it going on cooldown. This is clearly a really powerful effect, and there is an obvious target for it, that I'll get to shortly, but in my experience, it doesn't play quite as well as it sounds. The extra turn of setup is a noticeable downside, and it sometimes feels a bit awkward to fit into a spell rotation. Entropy is a debuff that removes one of the target's sustains every turn for up to 8 turns at max rank. This ability is sweet. There are many enemies that are really scary with sustains, but pretty harmless without them. I usually tend to run a Rune of Dissipation, and Entropy lets me replace it, so that alone basically makes this tree worth a category point. Now we get to the class categories, and there are 4 locked trees, so you're not getting them all, and you'll need to make some tough choices. But let's go in order. First up, the Gravity tree. Repulsion Blast blasts a wave of gravity in a large cone, knocking enemies back and dealing damage. It also only has a 4-turn cooldown. Once you push them away, Gravity Spike will help you keep them there, sucking them towards its center and dealing more damage. Keeping enemies away from you is excellent, but these spells have one big downside. They deal purely physical or gravity damage. This is a problem for 2 reasons. Firstly, pretty much all the other Paradox Mage talents deal temporal damage, and secondly, I feel like it kind of clashes with the fantasy of a wizard bending space-time itself. That makes me want to deal temporal damage. But okay, manipulating gravity is pretty cool, I guess, and ignoring that, this tree is pretty fun. The third talent is Gravity Locus. It's a sustain which creates a gravity field around you, converting up to 40% of all damage you deal into physical damage. It also slows incoming projectiles by up to 50% and protects you from all gravity damage and effects. Projectile slow is a fairly rare stat on gear and talents, so you don't get to experience it much, but it feels really good. In Tome, you're constantly getting projectiles thrown at you, and with projectile slow, you'll often get a chance to just move one tile and avoid 100% of the damage. Obviously moving takes a turn, but ideally you'll have some way of moving faster. Other than that, it also gives Repulsion Blast the ability to halve the target's knockback resistance for 2 turns. This sustain is clearly a key first step to solving the physical temporal damage split problem that you will have to deal with if you invest in this tree. You could also potentially combine it with the temporal form Prodigy. It gives you a talent that lasts 10 turns and gives you immunities to pin, bleed, blind and stun, 30% temporal resistance, and it sets your temporal damage bonus to your current highest damage bonus, which would be physical, plus 30% on top of that. Also, 50% of all damage you deal becomes temporal, and you gain 20% temporal resistance penetration. If you're wondering how this interacts with Gravity Locus, the temporal conversion just overrides the physical one. So a spell dealing 100% temporal damage would still deal 100% temporal damage with both Gravity Locus and Temporal Form active. A spell dealing 100% physical damage would deal 50% physical and 50% temporal. This way you could say you're even taking advantage of the damage split. Gravity Well is the last talent, and it's a radius 4 lingering AoE that deals a bit of damage every turn and constantly slows the global speed of all affected targets by up to 29%. This is the cherry on top of a very solid tree with great crowd control if you can deal with the physical damage. Matter is up next, and pretty much every Paradox Mage will be investing into this one. Dust to Dust is a Mage classic. It's a range 10 beam with a 3-turn cooldown. This is your bread and butter talent early game. You should float 3 or 4.0 and it will carry you. It deals half physical and half temporal damage, but it's not a big deal. You can also cast it on yourself and it will deal its damage in a radius 3 AoE over 30 turns. I struggle to think of a scenario where you would ever want to do this, but this can safely be ignored. Dust to Dust is great. Matter Weaving is a sustain that gives you up to 50% resistance to stun, bleed, and also up to around 40 armor in the late game. You should max this. Getting your immunities on talents is always good, as it lets you gear a lot more freely, and stun immunity is the #1 priority, so getting 50% for basically free is not bad. Not bad at all. Materialized Barrier creates a 3-length wall that lasts 4 turns. If you dig out the wall, you can inflict some bleed on enemies, but you can ignore that. Mostly this is a deceptively incredible defensive ability for just a single point. You spend a lot of time in cramped dungeons and tunnels in Tome, and having the ability to just wall everything off and basically reset the fight is invaluable. The more I use this spell, the more I learned to appreciate it, so give it a try. Disintegration is another sustain, and it's pretty unique. It gives your physical and temporal damage up to 40% chance to remove one beneficial physical or magical temporary effect from targets you hit. It also gives Dust to Dust the ability to dig up to 5 tiles into walls. So, if you were confused about the bleed part of Material's Barrier, this is the enabler, but mainly it's just very useful to have when you get cornered. It doesn't come up too often, but trust me, this will save your life a couple of times. On the buff removal from enemies, I'll say it doesn't feel very impactful, but I think that's mostly because by the time you get to put more points into this, you're already godlike powerful, so a few buffs disappearing here and there doesn't matter much. Next up is Spacetime Folding, and this is the complementary tree to Spacetime Weaving that I mentioned earlier. Warp Mines are a radius 1 trap, and when an enemy steps on it, they take temporal damage and get teleported either away or towards you. You get 2 talents, so you can choose the direction. Investing in this talent also improves the range of all other Spacetime Folding talents, and let's go over all of them together. Spatial Tether tethers a target to a location. Each time the target moves, they have an increasing chance per tile traveled away from the tether to be teleported back and to inflict a bunch of damage at both the start and exit points. So the kind of level 1 thinking is that you can just use this on a melee enemy and they won't be able to come close to you. Banish teleports any enemies within a small radius away from you and also stuns, blinds, confuses or pins them. This is an incredibly dangerous tool in the hands of the AI, as an otherwise completely harmless rat, paradox mage or temporal warden can sometimes banish you into a room full of really scary enemies, so do not underestimate the rares with these classes. The final ability is Dimensional Anchor, and it creates a radius 3 anti-teleport field, which also dazes enemies, and enemies attempting to teleport while anchored will take a bunch of damage. Okay, so the idea seems pretty obvious, right? You spatial tether something, then you warp mine it or banish it away, and then you dimensional anchor it so that the tether will keep trying to pull it back, but it can't, and the enemy keeps taking a lot of damage every turn. And honestly, that's a lot of effort, and look, it's cute, but it's obviously not really going to work if you're trying to beat the game. Or at least that's what my tiny brain thought. There are those genius, or perhaps mad enough, who build their whole characters around these spacetime folding and weaving trees. Now if that sounds interesting to you, I would point you to this guide on the Tome forums by Tradewindrider. It's written in great detail, and it's even been updated on April 2021, so everything in there should be applicable to today's game. It's honestly pretty incredible. Otherwise, you can experiment with putting a single point into these abilities to control enemies, but you have so many good defensive options on Paradox Mage that you never really need these. The next tree is Speed Control, which does exactly what it says. Celerity is a passive that gives you stacking movement speed when you move. It can go up to 105% extra movement speed at max rank and stacks, which is not remotely good enough. This won't save you when you need to run away. It also needs to ramp up for 3 turns and only lasts 2, just no. Time Dilation, though, is a different story. It's a passive that gives you stacking attack, mind and spell speed when you use a non-instant Chronomancy spell. This goes up to 51% spell speed at max rank and stacks. Acting faster is good, and this has no cost. It's just passive and you want to cast Chronomancy spells anyways. You very likely want to max this. Haste is an instant speed spell that gives you up to 35% global speed for 6 turns. If you're wondering about the difference between global speed and attack, mind and spell speed, you can read about it on the wiki, but in short, speed good. It's even better on weapon users since they can always simply auto-attack, but on casters you could theoretically run into a problem where you are so fast that all your spells are on cooldown, but I personally think that that's a great problem to have, so I really like Haste also. Time Stop is an instant speed spell with a fairly high paradox cost that gains you a few turns, but during them your damage is reduced by 100%. So you can use this to debuff your enemies, or maybe guarantee a safe escape with a movement infusion. It's quite versatile, but I honestly didn't find any need for it. Timetravel is the last, but far from the least of the unlocked class trees. Temporal Bolt is a 3-turn cooldown spell that pulls a bolt of temporal energy back through time, making it home in on your location, dealing damage to targets it passes through. It also gains 5% extra damage each time it moves. This spell is so cool, I knew the moment I saw it that this will be my main damaging spell. If something is right in your face, you'll potentially deal 50% more damage to it. This thing is nuts! It also even reduces the cooldown of one Chronomancy talent by a turn per enemy hit. The developer had to be on drugs. This is the best talent in the game. Only, it really isn't. The cooldown reduction part of it is nice, but it travels far too slowly to reliably land those plus 50% damage hits. Enemies also often just step out of the way. It's especially bad when it's traveling diagonally, and even when you do land those big hits, its base damage is just not good enough. You also don't really want to wait for the damage when a brawler rogue is standing next to you. Still, you might want to put 4 points into this eventually, just for the cooldown reduction. Time Skip is a spell that does good temporal damage, and if the target survives, it removes it from the timeline for up to 5 turns. This means it's literally just gone, it can't affect you in any way. The cooldown of this spell is conveniently 6 turns. This thing is the actual insane spell. It lets you just turn off the scariest enemy while you deal with the others, or heal and wait for cooldowns. Now is a good time to talk about Continuum Destabilization, which is a buff that gets applied to a target when they get forcefully teleported or their timeline gets messed with. It lasts for 100 turns, it cannot be removed, and it gives an infinitely increasing spell save bonus against those kinds of effects, so you can't just time skip an enemy infinitely. But you can probably time skip it 3 or 4 times, which is still incredible. You'll learn to love this spell. Oh, and by the way, this is one of the many obscure things I learned from the Tradewindrider's guide I mentioned. While an enemy is under the effect of Dimensional Anchor, Continuum Destabilization is completely ignored. the anchor lasts for 11 turns at max rank, and it only has a 10-turn cooldown, meaning you could actually, realistically, infinitely timeskip an enemy until it dies. Perhaps worth considering. Anyways, remember when I was talking about track type effects and how they're one of the best defensive talents in the game? Well, Temporal Reprieve might just be the best defensive talent in the game. It has a fixed cooldown, so you know it will be good, of 40 turns. When used, it transports you to a safe place for up to 7 turns at max rank. Specifically, it teleports you to a floating rock in space where you can just chill for a bit before getting teleported back. Why is this so good? Firstly, it's uniquely good with Paradox Mage because it lets you get your paradox under control. Temporal Reprieve itself has a fairly high paradox cost, but once maxed, you will be able to lower your paradox by just resting for 7 turns. Then, you'll also obviously get most of your abilities cooldown, importantly also your inscriptions, which most of them should have around 10 turns of cooldown. All your debuffs will also likely time out. Temporal Reprieve's duration is also often longer than 7 turns because your paradox will be high in combat. It is simply the ultimate oh shit button. Enemies need to survive your spells, get through all your inscriptions while also pressuring you enough so you actually have to use Temporal Reprieve, and then you just come back, mostly refreshed, and they have to do it again. Time doesn't pass while you're away, so the enemies do not heal, their abilities do not cool down. This talent is just not fair. This is the reason why playing Paradox Mage feels so safe and cozy. Sure, you have crazy damage reduction and really powerful spells, but it's about the feeling you get on the other classes when you're forced to pop all your infusions, your options start becoming more and more limited, and you start feeling dreadfully vulnerable. Well, it just doesn't happen on Paradox Mage. The class is at its weakest in the early game, but even then, it's fine. Echoes from the Past creates a medium-sized AoE around you. Affected targets will take a flat amount of temporal damage, as well as up to 40% of the difference between their current and max life as additional damage at max rank. This spell is awesome. Very few things will live after you cast this at the end of your spell rotation, but it does need a few points in it before it becomes that. Now we get to the locked trees, and it stays good. Flux feels very much like a core tree that basically every Paradox Mage should get. Induce Anomaly is an instant speed spell that creates a minor anomaly and significantly reduces your paradox. You want this. Reality Smearing is a 0 paradox sustain that converts 30% of all damage you take into paradox. You really want this. You might have noticed that there's a bit of a theme with the 30% all damage reductions, and it's a good theme, worth investing into. Attenuate is a 4-turn cooldown spell that does temporal damage over 4 turns in a small radius. Targets with Reality Smearing active, which means you, will instead recover life over 4 turns. Now the big one. If a target is reduced below 20% health while Attenuate is active, it is instantly slain. This works on almost everything in the game, and there's even more to this ability. It stacks, and I really wish it said that, because I didn't know when I played my character, but this is one of the best damage options Paradox Mage has, since you can use Seal Fate to prolong the duration and things like Redux to use it more often. I can confirm that even without stacking, this spell is absolutely incredible. The damage is good enough, the region is very relevant, and the execute is perfect. You need this. Twist Fate is then the icing on top of an already disgustingly powerful cake. If it's not on cooldown, it will halt minor anomalies you trigger for a few turns, letting your spell cast as normal and letting you then cast and, this is the key, target the anomaly. So now you're getting all the shields, clones and hastes only for yourself, while the slows and debuffs go on the enemies. And if it's something irrelevant, you can just hold and ignore the anomaly for a bit and cast it at your leisure. Learning Twist Fate also lets you target anomalies created by Induce Anomaly. So this spell is a complete game changer, and I wouldn't want to play Paradox Mage without this. Next up is Stasis, which is a tree that helps you keep your paradox under control, and this is a good time to mention Hidden Resources, which is by far the most popular prodigy on Paradox Mage. It lets you use your talents for 5 turns without using any resources. Crucially, you're also immune to anomalies during it. This means you can get to high paradox, pop hidden resources, and safely enjoy the benefits for 5 full turns, which is more than enough with all the speed Paradox Mage can get. If you do not take hidden resources, Stasis becomes basically a must-have. Spacetime Stability is a passive that lets you automatically adjust Paradox towards your preferred Paradox each turn. While resting, you will get twice this value added. It's not much, but you'll need all the help you can get without hidden resources. Time Shield is just temporal shield, but you also get a 50% shorter duration of debuffs applied to you while it's active. Its instant speed, lasts for a long time, even heals you after it's gone. This is obviously incredible, and a big reason why any build should at least consider Stasis. Stop deals decent temporal damage and stuns for up to 5 turns in a medium-sized AoE. This is a very good spell, only 8 turns of cooldown, so things will be stunned very often, and stun is excellent. Static History is the poor man's hidden resources. It makes you not create minor anomalies for up to 9 turns. Unfortunately, your Paradox will still go up during this, and it has no effect on major anomalies. Still, this spell is really crucial because it allows you to consistently cast all your spells at the beginning of fights. In longer fights though, you need to be prepared to deal with some major anomalies, but thankfully, simply running away works against basically all of them. Just make sure you can run away really fast. Timeline Threading is a tree that I have the least experience with, because honestly it's difficult to convince yourself it's worth it compared to the other trees. Rethread is a 4-turn cooldown temporal damage sort of mini chain lightning, since it can only jump to 3 targets. It's solid. Temporal Fugue is bizarre. For up to 9 turns, you create 2 alternate versions of yourself. All damage dealt by you and your copies is reduced by 2/3, and all damage taken split between the 3 of you. These clones don't cast the spell you cast, they have a mind of their own, but you can take direct control of them and set their talent usage. I really kind of hate this spell. The clones get in the way, they aggro enemies they shouldn't, and it's just not very reliable. It's a great tool though if you're trying to break the game, as Temporal Fugue has a reputation for being quite buggy. Braid Lifelines is a passive that gives your Rethread the ability to debuff all targets hit, making them take up to half of all damage dealt to other braided targets. This is pretty bad. You will rarely have multiple really tough enemies to fully utilize this, and braiding the lifeline of a boss with some common trash mobs is useless, since they will just get blown up. I don't like it. Cease to Exist is the one bright shining light in this tree. It's an up to 10 turn duration single target debuff that severely lowers a target's resistance to physical and temporal damage. The key here being lowers, which can give enemies negative resistances, so it's always useful. A very powerful talent, but do you really want to spend a whole category point for it? Probably not. Spellbinding is the final and a very unique tree. Once you unlock it, you can put points into any of the talents right away, you don't need to go in order. The talents are all sustains, and they are Empower, which greatly increases a Chronomancy spell's spell power, Extension, which slightly extends the duration of a Chronomancy spell, Matrix, which slightly reduces the cooldown of a Chronomancy spell, and Quicken, which greatly decreases the casting speed of a Chronomancy spell. Each spell can only be spellbound in one way, so there are a lot of options to experiment with. Some obvious uses are Extension with Temporal Reprieve, and Empower with Attenuate to beat high spell saves. Quicken is the worst of these, as you already have access to a lot of speed in Paradox Mage, but overall this is just a nice quality of life tree that will help you solve a few of your character's problems. So this is my guy, straight from the final boss fight. I didn't change anything. The first thing you might notice is that I have this green aura around my character. This is a bug. It's not an effect that I have from a skill, but the good thing is that I figure out how to get rid of it for all my next characters, but unfortunately I can't really get rid of it for this character. For full transparency's sake, I do use some mods while playing Tome, but they're all mods that don't affect gameplay. It's things like item descriptions, making them more easily readable, changing the information on monsters when you hover over them so you don't have to inspect them as often, things like removing the swirly effect when you get stunned because that gives me motion sickness, things like that. Nothing that makes the game easier or harder or changes anything gameplay wise. So let's look at the skill tree. Let's talk about the stats. First, I maxed out magic, and I don't think you really have much of a choice. You need magic to unlock all of your spells, and it obviously increases your damage. You want to max this first. Second, you want to go willpower, because it reduces your effective paradox, which just makes it a lot easier to just cast your spells. Third, I took Cunning. Crit chance, you know, it's never bad. Better than the other ones. And fourth, I just went into some Constitution, because the max life is nice, and the healing mod is actually pretty useful, because Attenuate gives a pretty sizable health regen effect, so obviously you benefit from the heal mod more than if you just had, you know, only regen on your gear. In terms of my race, I went for Kornak, because like I said, this was my first character that I ever made for Paradox Mage, and I usually go Kornak just so I can explore as much of the class as possible. But for Paradox Mage specifically, Kornak is probably just the best choice no matter what, just so you can unlock as many of its trees as possible, because they're just all so good. I went for Energy on level 1, because I thought that Energy Decomposition is just a flat damage reduction always. It gives the max damage reduction, but obviously it doesn't, because I can't read. I was kind of duped into it, but it's still pretty good. You know, it gives you some survivability in the early game, and you can start taking it right from level 1, right? Whereas something like Flux, you can also start taking from level 1. So yeah, perhaps a better choice to get Attenuate on level 8. But I got Flux on level 10, and then I went into Stasis on level 20. I delayed my inscriptions, but it was never really a problem. Then I took the inscription on level 34 and from Maj'Eyal. While leveling, you want to put 5 points into Dust to Dust, which will carry you through the early game. Then once you get Flux and you get to Attenuate, you can take 2-3 points away, put them into Attenuate, max it out as fast as possible, and this will carry you through the rest of the game, all the way until the end. Attenuate never starts being bad, especially if you know you can stack it. It's obviously even better. If you go Flux into Stasis, into Energy, you even have a really nice kind of progression of defenses, since you get Reality Smearing, then you get Time Shield, which is just incredible, makes you really invincible in the early game, because it's a pretty big shield, it's instant speed cast, and it gives you life regen buff when it goes away, so you're not dying with Time Shield. Obviously, if you're going Hidden Resources, you might skip Stasis and go into Spellbinding instead, but Stasis feels really good. All of the spells are really powerful. The rest you just kind of fill out as you go. Echoes from the Past is a pretty good AoE, execute type of effect. You want to eventually put points into it. Time Dilation obviously is very good. Haste, Global Speed. You can have enough as casters, but I still enjoyed having 10 points in both of them. You'll kind of know as you're playing where you need the extra points. It's not really that important either way. Once you get Attenuate, once you get your Stasis and Energy, you're kind of good to go. I'm pretty satisfied with the way that I ended up skilling my class points. I don't think there's much improvement to be made. But then we get to the generic trees, and I made, I think, quite a few mistakes here. First of all, I didn't max Seal of Fate for whatever reason. I don't know what was going through my head at that point, but this really should be maxed, because no matter if you are stacking Attenuate or not, you know, prolonging my stun, prolonging entropy, it's just all good, so you really should max Seal Fate eventually. Another big mistake I made is putting points into Spin Fate instead of Fate Weaver. I thought that, you know, more defense, more saves can't hurt, so it's kind of whatever. I felt like I don't really need the points anyways, so I'm just gonna put it here. But in High Peak and on the final bosses, I actually lacked spell power, so Fate Weaver would have been a really smart and easy choice how to get the spell power that I needed. I also ended up putting 5 points into Foresight, which is not necessary at all. What I should have done is I could have put a few points into light armor training to get my armor hardiness to almost 100% with 120 armor. It would have been an extra layer of defense. I also didn't need 5 points in precognition. I could have put it into contingency just so I don't ever get one shot. But again, these are kind of minor details. By far the biggest mistake is not putting points into Fate Weaver and not maxing Seal of Fate. The rest is kind of whatever, because again, you are so powerful, it doesn't really matter, and these are all kind of late game choices where, okay, instead of a few extra points of defense, I would have had some extra armor hardiness. It doesn't really matter, you have like 90% damage reduction from all these things. For Prodigies, I went with Ethereal Form on level 25 and with Corrupted Shell on level 42. I'm pretty happy with both of these choices, obviously with the benefit of not having to take hidden resources. I could kind of fully focus on the defenses. I could have sacrificed one of them for Master of Disasters, which would have solved my spell power problems, but it feels like kind of a waste when you have tools to deal with it, like Fate Weaver or going Spellbinding and Empower. And with Ethereal Form and Corrupted Shell, you're just so incredibly tanky. So is Hidden Resources worth it? Well, the answer to that question is probably, but it's absolutely not necessary. You have to make a lot of sacrifices in terms of your points to be able to get your Paradox under control if you don't have Hidden Resources, and even then it rarely is actually under control. You will have major anomalies proccing in big fights, and this is fun, but also potentially very dangerous. In the final boss fight, that took me a really long time because I struggled with my spell power. I opened a demon portal to hell, which flooded the level with a bunch of enemies. And I also had an evil twin spawn, so these are the two pretty bad major anomalies. But I actually ended up kind of turning them to my favor because I made the demons and even my evil clone somehow fight the bosses, so it bought me a bunch of time. I was able to wall myself in the corner of the level and let Elandar fight with the demons and my evil twin. And those are really some of the worst ones. There is no major anomaly that literally just like kills you. It's nothing like that. It's just things that kill you over a few turns. So as it's the case with most things in Tome, it's kind of up to you. Hidden resources are good, but you can make it work even without it. Let's talk about the items. Now again, I'm using a mod, so the item descriptions are different, but the only thing you really need to know is what this minus means, and that means it's an immunity. So confusion minus is confusion immunity, stun freeze immunity, the rest is mostly pretty self-explanatory. I have two unique items, Life Drinker in my offhand, which is kind of just a staple weapon for any casters. The stats are alright, but mostly it's the 15% Blood Grasp, which does some extra damage and gives you some extra HP. And then I also use a Choker of Dread, which I don't think is a staple for anyone. It's kind of my personal favorite. It gives 100% blind immunity. That's it. The rest of the stats are not really relevant. And there's a bunch of items that give this, but this one also has a Elder Vampire summon, which is really good. It spawns and it immediately taunts the same turn that you spawn it, so you don't take any damage, and it tanks for way longer than you would think. It's really good right when you get it, and this is a pretty common item, so you should have it almost every time around the Dreadfell, and it scales all the way into the late game. Even in high peak, even against the final bosses, this vampire will tank for a bunch of turns. You know, in a perfect world, you probably don't want to run Choker of Dread as your amulet, but I kind of struggle to get blind immunity on my other items, and I kind of hate blind. It's a really annoying effect. It happens way too often for my liking, and I don't like wasting my cleanses on it. So just having this amulet kind of for this purpose and having peace of mind so I don't have to worry about it is pretty useful. And I rarely actually get good enough gear that I replace it. Other than that, everything is pretty basic. In fact, it's pretty bad. Most of my gear is below average. Just some life, some resistances, some immunities, and a few damage mods. One thing I did manage is I have a very high damage penetration, 70%, plus the all damage penetration from the ethereal form means that I go through most of enemy resistances, and the rest is just very basic. Pretty bad. This cloak is not very good. These gloves are average. This belt is completely awful. It's hard to believe that I didn't find anything better. I don't really remember, but I do remember that I was just so powerful that I didn't want to grind the vaults, for example, to find something better. This is good enough. This kind of gear is good enough if you are Paradox Mage in the late game. Obviously on boots or any character that can run arcane items, you want the Undeterred mod, which gives you these 3 immunities, Silence, Confusion and Stun. It's always a good thing. I had a pretty, again, below average psionic shield, but it's enough that it made me basically invincible for those 5 turns, combined with all the other damage resistances that Paradox Mage has. A very average lantern, and then just some rings to finish off my resistances, some extra HP, some health regen. Nothing special. I want to comment about how good the class feels to play, how many things you can autocast and so on. As you can see, I play with just a single hotbar, which is usually fine, and Paradox Mage is no exception. I had plenty of space, I didn't even need to push my sustains to the second bar, so no problems there. I had Seal Fate, Webs of Fate, Time Shield, Static History and Haste on autocast when enemies are visible for 99% of the game, and it worked perfectly fine. If a fight is dragging on, and for boss fights, you wanna cast these spells manually, just to achieve maximum efficiency, and because Static History could even become a debuff if cast at the wrong time, let's say you need to lower your paradox with Induce Anomaly, it will just fizzle if Static History is active, so you don't want that. So, in conclusion, Paradox Mage is without a doubt one of the best classes in the game, as it doesn't really have any weaknesses and ascends to godhood in the mid to late game. If you're looking to try the higher difficulties or roguelike, this would be a great class to start with. And that's all I have to say about Paradox Mage. Thank you for watching, and you can expect videos like this about some of the other classes. Hopefully.